Namaste, I am Dr. Mehak Uppal and I welcome you all to this present lecture titled Introduction to Ethics, which is the first in a series of lectures on applied ethics. It aims at introducing you to the philosophical field of ethics by discussing the nature of ethics, its relation with morality, the various subdisciplines of ethics. All of us have been taught right from birth by our elders, parents, teachers, and by the human community at large that we have to be ethical in what we do, that we ought to be moral in our thinking and our actions, that we ought to side with that which is right, moral, just, fair, and most importantly, good. But what does being ethical actually imply? Does it merely consist in obeying what our family, society, and community tells us to do? Or does it consist in developing a conscience and rationale of our own regarding what is valuable in human interactions and conduct? Why is it that following our instincts and desires does not always constitute the right or the good thing to do? What is good after all, and who decides what is good? How do I, as an individual agent, determine the good course of action when the morals and values taught to me come under conflict with each other? These questions and others like them must have been a subject of reflection for most of you at some point of time or other of your lives. This set of introductory lectures on applied ethics aims at addressing and engaging some such concerns regarding the values of morality, ethics, goodness, rightness, etc. So, what is ethics after all, and why are we studying it under the course on philosophy? Philosophy concerns itself with the general and fundamental presuppositions about the nature of reality, knowledge, values, etc. Ethics is a subfield of philosophy which deals with questions concerning the values associated with human conduct. Let us look at some ways in which ethics has been defined. Duncan Pritchard says, ethics or moral philosophy is the study of the codes of conduct that govern our behavior. Thoreau says, ethics deals with what is right or wrong in human behavior and conduct. And William Lilly writes, ethics is the normative science of the conduct of human beings living in societies, a science which judges this conduct to be right or wrong, good or bad, or in some similar way. Etymologically, the word ethics draws its origins from the root ethos, meaning character. As most of the definitions and descriptions enlisted just now suggest, ethics is a specialized study of the codes and norms governing how humans conduct themselves and how they behave vis-a-vis other fellow humans, non-human animals, and the environment at large. Ethics is also often defined as moral philosophy. It is a specialized branch of philosophy that attempts to systematically engage with questions concerning the nature and status of moral standards, moral dilemmas, moral conduct, moral language, moral reasoning, moral agency of humans, and most generally, the nature and status of the moral value of the good. If we try to reflect upon our usage of the term good, we would notice that we end up using this term in broadly two ways. Firstly, we use it as a way of judging or commending those objects that serve their purpose and function well. For instance, I may say that this is a good computer or a good camera. In both these statements, I am trying to describe the object as being of superior quality. On the other hand, we may also use the term good in a moral and not merely a descriptive sense. In such instances, we use the predicate good to judge and assess the character of a person or an act or behavior done by a person as being valuable and morally commendable. So, we may say that Gandhiji was a good person, or you did a good deed by helping the aged lady cross the street. Most generally, all our moral education aims at inculcating in us the most fundamental moral dictums that we ought to choose to do good and avoid evil. And since good actions make a good moral character, therefore, by doing so, we ought to choose to be good and not be evil. Whenever we are told not to hurt or not to lie, not to steal, or whenever we are told to be truthful, loving, non-violent, we are being guided into understanding what we ought to do and what we ought not to do. We are being guided into understanding what is morally permissible and what is not. Another peculiarity of moral actions and conduct is that all human actions are not eligible for moral assessment and evaluation. Rather, only those actions which are intentionally, deliberately, and volitionally done are morally relevant for being scrutinized as good or bad. Actions which we as human agents do not intentionally choose to do cannot be assessed as being good or bad, moral or immoral. Imagine you are traveling in an overly crowded bus. With a sudden thirst of the brakes, you end up losing your balance and stepping onto a fellow passenger's foot, thereby hurting her badly. Can you be reprimanded for causing pain to the lady standing next to you? Was it an immoral, wrong or bad thing to do? In fact, your action was not a deliberate one at all, and for this very reason, it falls outside the domain of morality altogether. It was an unfortunate action for sure, but definitely not a deliberate act for which you could be blamed. The subject matter of morality is constituted by volitional acts. Morality and morals consist in precepts, conventions, standards and injunctions which guide and govern intentional human actions, conduct and behavior by specifying what actions ought to be done and what actions ought not to be done. Ethics, being defined as a philosophical study of moral conduct, has morals, values, judgments, etc. as its subject matter. Morality tells us what we ought to do, when and how. Ethics, insofar as it is a philosophical inquiry, goes a step deeper in questioning, analyzing, arguing and reasoning about the presuppositions of morality itself. It is seldom concerned with specific moral injunctions, but rather interested in what generally makes an act a good act, and also giving reasons for why that is so. Ethics as a discipline, therefore, not only deals with answering the questions of what is morality, but also engages in understanding why a particular course of action is considered to be moral. It thereby also constitutes a study of the principles and criterion which lie at the very foundation of moral values and moral judgments. Those principles which allow us to determine more generally what is right, what is good, and also what is valuable. Ethics should not be viewed as a set of moral codes. It needs to be distinguished from morality, for morality is the set of beliefs and practices about good and evil, right and wrong, by means of which we guide our behavior. Ethics, on the other hand, can be understood as a second order philosophical inquiry on the nature, presuppositions, and foundations of those beliefs and laws of conduct. So, rather than simply engaging with the question of what ought to be done, which is a question of morality, ethical inquiries also try to analyze why it ought to be done. Why is something pronounced as good? What are the reasons for calling an act virtuous or vicious? Why we need to be moral? Who is a moral agent, etc. Such an inquiry is grounded in critical analysis and philosophical reasoning about the concepts and principles that lie at the very foundation of moral precepts and dictums. Ethics may also be understood as a science, for it consists in a body of reasoned truths organized in a logical order having specific material and formal objects. It is the science of what humans ought to be, how humans ought to behave, how they ought to interact and conduct themselves as conscious agents who can freely choose and decide from among given alternatives and make judgments about what is valuable and what is rightful. The discipline of ethics also presents itself as a rational science insofar as its principles are deduced by humans by engaging in deliberate reasoning concerning the matters of free will. Based on the kind of subject matter it engages with, ethics may be classified as theoretical or practical. It is theoretical inasmuch as it provides the fundamental principles on the basis of which moral judgments are arrived at. It is practical inasmuch as it is concerned about an end to be gained and the means of attaining it. Finally, it may also be said to be a normative or regulative science inasmuch as it helps to regulate and direct human life, giving the right orientation to one's existence. There are several ways in which morality can be discussed and approached. The first approach consists in a descriptive empirical inquiry, which may be historical and anthropological, thereby trying to understand the history of morals in the development of human race. It may be sociological, thereby trying to understand the sociological underpinnings of morals. It may also be psychological, thereby trying to understand the psychological underpinnings of human moral behavior. These approaches, while engaging with human nature and moral values, do not necessarily raise fundamental questions about the nature and the metaphysical or the epistemological status of morals as such, even if they may have a direct bearing on the same. The second approach of studying morals is the philosophical approach and consists in three subdisciplines of ethics. Normative or prescriptive ethical theories attempt at providing a theoretical framework which may consist of one or more generalizable standards for identifying good or morally permissible actions from those that are morally wrong or impermissible. Different normative theorists would give a different criterion of adjudicating the goodness of an act. For instance, let us take the case of cheating in an exam. While the consequentialist would assess the act of cheating on the basis of the consequences that it can and does generate, the non-consequentialist, on the other hand, would focus on the intention of the agent while making the assessment irrespective of the consequences that the act of cheating led to. While the utilitarian would point out that an act is good if it leads to the greatest happiness of the greatest number of people, a deontologist would point out that an act is good only if it originated from a sense of duty and free rational will. In giving these standards, the normative theories are not merely describing the criterion for adjudicating what I ought to do, but they are also prescribing how humans ought to reason and choose to behave. The analytical, critical, or meta-ethical theories of ethics are not descriptive or prescriptive in the ways that have been described above. Rather, they focus on the analysis of the meanings of the central terms used in ethical reasoning and decision making. They try to engage with logical, metaphysical, epistemological, or semantical questions such as what is the meaning of good? What is the nature of good? Is it objective, subjective, or intersubjective in character? Are moral values relative to culture and customs, or are they universal? How can ethical and moral judgments be justified? Can they even be assessed for their truth and falsity? Are moral judgments assertions of facts, or are they mere emotive expressions? What is the meaning of free will and rational choice? Are moral agents ever absolutely free? Finally, applied or practical ethics takes for consideration particular moral dilemmas, discussing the philosophical challenges that make them complex to resolve. Applied ethical theories utilize discussions from the normative and the meta-ethical approaches regarding the nature of moral agency, personhood, value of life, freedom and autonomy, privacy, virtue, duty, etc., to see how they have a bearing on the theoretical and the practical domain of our everyday concerns such as capital punishment, abortion, suicide, surrogacy, cloning, mass media, to name a few. For instance, a practical ethicist may ask, if all life is valuable and killing is wrong, then what justifies subjecting convicts to capital punishment, or using innocent animals for experimentation and medical trials, or the incessant use of human life as a tool in wars? Or similarly, if autonomy and the right over one's body is a fundamental moral value, then how and why are abortion, suicide, or euthanasia wrong? These are extremely complex issues. They may involve several moral concerns together and may even involve a discord across equally significant moral precepts. These practical issues may even encompass larger social and legal aspects which cannot be straightforwardly resolved merely by having recourse to a particular moral precept or a normative theory about the nature and the status of goodness. Normative ethics, meta-ethics, and applied ethics together constitute the three sub-disciplines under ethics. To sum up, the current lecture introduced you to the philosophical field of ethics, briefly drawing attention to what its subject matter is and what are the specialized concerns and questions of its sub-disciplines. In the next lecture of this series, you will become acquainted with a more detailed discussion about the nature of morality and how ethics happens to be interrelated with and yet remains distinct from morality and morals. This is a list of references which you can consult for a more detailed understanding of the themes discussed in this lecture. Thank you.